Welcome to The Kingstonian, a podcast that profiles individuals who are passionate about what they do for a living, about what organization they belong to, or simply passionate about the community they are a part of. Hello there, and welcome. My name is Dave Cunningham. In this episode, we speak with someone passionate about youth programs to start with, and is currently the chair of the United Way Board of Directors. His name is Daren Dougall. Daren, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
We are going to talk about a few different things, One Roof in particular, and the United Way's generous contribution to that particular program and the big building that's going to be put together in the not too distant future. But I want to go back to your interest in working with youth, and that started with the Youth Diversion program as a volunteer when you were here at Queen's as a student, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Actually, I was in my second or third year looking to pursue a degree in criminology, a postgraduate degree in criminology, and thought I should get some experience. So I pulled out this thing called a telephone book and looked in the yellow pages and found this little organization called Youth Diversion and started volunteering as a mentor with a high needs young person, an Indigenous youth from Tyendinaga Mohawk territory, and him and I coincidentally continue to converse some 35 years later. But that's what started me on my path to youth diversion.
What was it that drew you to that particular plan?
Interestingly enough, my original goal was to go through the law school, and I had a bit of a day of reckoning just when I was preparing for the LSATs, and couldn't wrestle my head around the ethical dilemma of defending a guilty person, and thought rather than focus on that part of the legal aspect of criminology, that I would focus more on the prevention and early intervention and focus on how to keep people from victimizing other people in our community.
So you did your undergraduate degree here at Queen's and then decided to do a master's.
Yeah, it was actually so I did an undergraduate degree in the Faculty of Arts and Science, and it was a special field concentration in psychology and sociology at that time, and then started a youth diversion program, worked for a few years, and then wanted to talk to grown-ups again, spending all my days talking to kids and then spending my nights talking to my own children at home. I wanted to spend some quality time with grown-ups, so I did a part-time master's degree in education at the Faculty of Education.
What was the thesis that you put together for your master's?
It was all about school suspensions. And at that time in the mid-'90s, there was a real push by the provincial government to invoke what was called a zero-tolerance policy towards violence in schools. And in my work at Youth Diversion, we saw a very clear connection between kids' criminality and school failure, and in particular, kids who were pushed out, thrown out, or left school. And looking at the policies that government implemented at the time, it was very clear that those policies would continue to push the most vulnerable populations out of the school system.
And so after you finished your master's program, I think you decided to, or Queen's asked you to put together a course?
Yeah, it was actually after the defense of my graduate thesis. I was approached by a couple faculty members at the Faculty of Education that asked if I would teach one of their courses on at-risk youth. And for me, it was a natural progression in my career. I started working with kids as a caseworker. Then I was executive director, so I was managing an organization. And then teaching at the faculty gave me the opportunity to encourage teachers to reach out to the most vulnerable kids in their classroom, the ones that you typically send to the office, and try to engage them in a successful, meaningful way that would lend them the opportunity to be successful in education as well.
What sorts of things would you do with the teachers to give them some hints on how to work with the kids in that situation?
A lot of it was strength-based stuff. A lot of it was just different strategies and techniques that worked well with young people, especially complex young people that were dealing with a multiplicity of negative factors in their life. So a lot of it was around understanding what was going on in kids' lives, best practices in responding, alternative teaching strategies, teaching outside the box sort of thing, and a huge part of it was classroom management outside the box. So, recognizing that sending a kid to the office isn't a win for anybody. It's not a win for the teacher. It's not a win for the student. It's certainly not a win for the administration of the school.
Now, when you graduated from Queen's and you started working for Youth Diversion program, the program has expanded quite considerably since you started.
Yeah, when I started at Youth Diversion, it was a 1.2 person organization, and now I think it's over $1 million program. It's one of the largest youth serving organizations in the city, with probably 20 plus staff now, serving well over 1,200 kids a year.
Now, do you see that as a plus or a minus? I mean, are you looking at the fact that the program is opened up to a lot more kids and you're helping a lot more kids, or there's just more kids who are having issues?
Well, it's a really good point, and I think it's both.
Yeah.
In the first place, when I started at Youth Diversion, it was an organization that was very reactive, primarily reactive to kids that were getting in trouble with the police. And it was an organization that was started by a local judge who saw too many kids coming through his courtroom in the late 60s and early 70s, and worked very closely with the police, but it was always that reactive. And when they brought in the mentoring program that I was involved in, that was a little bit of prevention. It was focusing more on helping kids. But again, the kids that were identified to that program were kids that were in trouble. Over the years, the organization has really embraced a prevention and early intervention model. So we developed some school-based programs in conjunction with the Limestone District School Board and the Algonquin Lakeshore Catholic District School Board that were really designed to be preventative. So getting kids that were starting to experience some school problems and to reach out to them and support them so that they maintain their connection to the learning process. And then other programs that started were focused on pure prevention. So we developed a program here called Rebound that we took into schools, and it was all about giving kids the skills that they needed to make different decisions, focusing on what we called a cognitive behavioral approach, but it was essentially giving kids the tools to make different choices, different decisions when they were faced with some of the complex issues that kids are faced with.
Do you help with respect to academics when you're doing your programs, or how does that work?
Well, the wonderful thing about both the Algonquin Lakeshore Catholic District School Board and the Limestone District School Board is with the one program that we developed in the early 90s, it was an alternative to home suspension. So if you think about a kid who gets in trouble at school, they end up being sent home, for 3 days, 5 days, up to 20 days, and then potentially expelled depending on the behavior. And what that does is it completely removes them from learning. Mm-hmm. And it's punitive. It's based on a punishment model. When we developed the alternative to home suspension program, which is now called SNAP, it was all about keeping kids engaged. So both school boards always put a teacher attached to the program, not full-time, but a teacher there so that kids could continue to learn while they were suspended. So the Youth Diversion Program staff would work on all of those softer skills designed to help kids make different decisions when they go back to school. So if they were angry, upset, couldn't cope with anxiety, depression, whatever they were dealing with, that when they went back to school, they had some skills that would allow them to act differently when they were faced with those same kinds of challenges, and at the same time keep up with their schoolwork. So the schools saw the value in it and continue to this day to see the value in providing support to those kids when they have to be removed from school.
Now, you have retired from the Youth Diversion Program, correct?
That's right. I retired from both the Youth Diversion Program and from the Faculty of Education, where I taught for 20 years. So,
do you keep in contact, other than the fellow that you mentioned at the beginning, the fellow from Tyendinaga, do you keep in touch with any of the other students that you may have run across over the years?
I don't keep in touch with them intentionally because it would be wrong. But I can tell you that the incidental contact is fantastic. Kingston's a small town.
Yeah.
And it goes almost never a week where I don't run into somebody that went through a Youth Diversion Program, whether it's a kid on the street that just happens to recognize me, or I've done presentations at businesses and workplaces where staff have come up to me afterwards and said, "Do you remember me?" I was at St. Lawrence College doing a United Way presentation to a senior executive group, and one of the senior executives was a client that had gone through Youth Diversion. So, I've had people come up to me and say, "I'm doing great, thank you." I had one not young man, he's probably mid-40s now, but just a couple of years ago, he came up to me in a restaurant, stopped at the table. I recognized him, and he stopped, and he asked me if I recognized him, and I did, and he said, "I just wanted to tell you that you saved my life, and thank you." I mean, those things are I mean, that's what you do it for, right? Mm-hmm. And to
That's your passion.
Yeah, and to see that, it takes a long time sometimes for kids to wrap their heads around where they're at and where they've been and to get some success in their life. But when you see it, I'll tell you, it's worth the 30 years that you put into the organization. Mm-hmm. Just one of those. Yeah. And I've had tons. So
that's great. Can you give me a sense as to what the state of youth homelessness is these days?
Well, I think, youth homelessness is one of those things in a city like Kingston, which isn't very obvious sometimes. I mean, we see kids that are panhandling on the streets or that seem a little unkempt at some of the businesses and that downtown. But when you compare it to large cities where people are sleeping on the streets, you just don't see it. Mm-hmm. It's very hidden. A lot of it's kids that are either homeless completely, living off-site, could be in tents in some of the parts of the city, but also in what I would call precarious housing situations where they're, going couch to couch sometimes on friends' places or living in exploitative relationships, specifically for housing, where kids are homeless and end up in an exploitative relationship to keep a roof over their head. And it is a complex problem in Kingston. The United Way's done some great work on identifying. They do a time count every year or two, just to kind of assess what the situation is. And there's a lot of young people that are homeless, a lot of female young people that are homeless, which is as concerning as the males, obviously. But it is a troubling situation in Kingston. A lot of it stems from family conflict, where parents and kids just don't get along. Kids' lives are a lot more complex than they ever have been. Mm-hmm. And with the degree of social media influence and the accessibility to a variety of different substances that 30 years ago they wouldn't have even known about, let alone known where to access and been able to access. And I think the complexity, the recognition of significant mental health issues emerging in youth, and where they may or may not be diagnosed, and oftentimes kids are self-medicating, not effectively. They think it's effective, but they're not effective, and they end up burning bridges at home, getting thrown out or pushed out by family, or leaving. And then, for the average Kingstonian to find a rental property is virtually impossible for the average working person. Mm-hmm. For somebody who has all of those complexities in life, then you add poverty. It's almost impossible to find a place for them to live.
Now, one of the reasons why I invited you here was because of your role with the United Way and the recent announcement about the One Roof expansion. And you have sort of gone into partnership, at least the United Way has, with home-based housing. And can you describe for us and for our listeners who may not be aware of just what home-based housing is?
Well, my commitment to the United Way has been as a long-standing, first of all, when I was at Youth Diversion, we were a member agency, so we received funding from United Way. But I've been a long-time donor, and I've been a board member and currently the chair of the board. And it's really an organization that not only raises money and spends money in the community and helps agencies, but it builds capacity. And it's an agency that is all about making sure that our community supports its most vulnerable people. So the One Roof project started a couple of years ago, and it was an idea of bringing agencies together under one roof to support young people in a place where young people were comfortable. So we've got some 30 or 40 amazing youth organizations in this community, but they're all located in various spots, and it's not necessarily a good idea to have them all housed in one building. But what One Roof does is it brings the workers together in that space where kids have created a certain level of safety, and the workers attend at various times, staggered times, and provide their services right where the kids need them.
So this is not necessarily a headquarters for all of these agencies. It's just a spot where they all can gather.
That's right.
Okay. So there has been a One Roof on Barry Street, correct?
Yeah, home-based housing opened the One Roof a couple of years ago just on North Barry Street, a couple of 3 blocks north of Princess Street, in a kind of right around the Skeleton Park area. So it's quite a ways away from the downtown, away from major transportation routes.
Now, we didn't really answer the question about home-based housing and what do they do. Let's start with that.
Home-based housing is an organization I'm familiar with because they've served lots and lots of young people and young adults in this community. They have done some amazing work around homelessness reduction and prevention, as well as creating homes for people. They've created some great supportive housing and independent living resources around the city for adults, but also for kids. One of their most successful projects a few years back was the acquisition of a large property where multiple kids could live called Rise 149, where it's basically a supportive housing environment for kids that are transitioning out of their parental home or familial home and into independence, but they're not quite there yet, so they need that little bit of a support along the way. And then Homebase does a lot of prevention work as well, works with other agencies to try to keep kids in their homes when it's safe and appropriate to do that, and to try to get them housed when it's not.
Before we started recording the program, you and I were talking, and you described the move from Barry Street to Princess Street and what it really means in terms of the One Roof complex.
Yeah, One Roof is quite a small building on Barry Street, and one of the things that the staff there's one staff that I'm familiar with, Ashley O'Brien, and then the staff from the agencies have recognized the increased complexities that these kids have and the lack of accessibility that they feel that they have to the mainstream services. So you look at psychiatric care, for example. You know, for a young person to access psychiatric care, they're either going to go to an emergency room or they're going to go to the family doctor, get a referral if that's possible. And a lot of these kids simply don't have family doctors. So to make those kinds of clinical services available to kids meant a strong partnership with the medical community, including that at Queen's. But One Roof simply doesn't have the physical plant necessary. So Home-based housing found an opportunity to acquire a building on Princess Street, the old Princess Street United Church, and proposed to the United Way that they would move One Roof from its Barry Street location to Princess Street United Church. And the United Way board of directors and a working group met with the Home-based housing board and talked about a lot of different issues, and at the end of the day, committed over $400,000 for that renovation and that move, recognizing that it's a resource that this community needs and that can be sustained for as long as it's needed in the Kingston community.
What's the relationship between home-based housing and Princess Street United Church?
I'm not sure how it started, but I know that the congregation at Princess Street United Church recognized that it was an aging congregation and the numbers were dwindling, and they saw the sustainability of the church in question, and they wanted to maintain the building. It's quite an old building, and they wanted to maintain it as a community resource. And I think home-based housing negotiated with the congregation and ultimately probably the United Church of Canada to acquire the church at a very reasonable cost, with a commitment to not only allow the congregation to continue to meet as it needs to, but also to transform the buildings, and there's multiple buildings on the site, but to transform the site into a resource for the most complex, most needy young people and young adults in our community.
That whole neighborhood is changing quite dramatically as you drive down Princess Street. Does that play into this at all in terms of what influence it might have, or?
Well, David, what really sold me as a board member on the idea of the move to Princess Street was that it puts the needs of young people in our community's eyesight. So when you locate any kind of program for complex people with complex issues and people with challenges, if you move them away from the main street, then it's not an issue. It's an invisible issue. And I think by putting it right on our main street, right on a very vibrant community, the Williamsville community, it's actually an area that I grew up in when I was younger. And it's a growing community. And to recognize that the kids that will utilize One Roof and the kids that utilize the transformed Princess Street United Church and the services that Homebase will provide there, deserve to be on our main street. Mm-hmm. There are kids and there are young people and young adults, and we need to be reminded that they need our support and that we need to create and support the resources that they need to be successful.
Do you have any sense as to the timeline for the construction of the expansion?
Well, I know with One Roof, the move we want to happen before summer. And then with some of the other plans that Homebase has some very exciting plans, which include some residential units, but also includes lots of community space and again, space that's going to engage people in supporting young people. And I think that they're taking it from a very considered approach. So they're going slow. As you can imagine, in any community, it takes a lot to walk through the building process and renovation process. Princess Street United Church is also a historical building. And there's a commitment to the congregation to maintain some of its character as well. So it's going to be a staged process. One roof we expect to see in there by the summertime. And then the rest of the project, which is quite ambitious, will probably be phased in over the following 1 to 5 years.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I like about this whole project is the fact that we hear conversations about donating to the United Way and for a particular cause, and we want to take this money and allocate it to the youth in our community. And you can say that, but it's really important to have something concrete that you can point to when you raise money.
Good point. And it really is a legacy project. One of the commitments that our board made at the United Way was that the money that was raised through the Rock in the Big House concert in Kingston, one of the largest concerts ever held in Kingston, in terms of appeal, that those funds would go directly back to youth, but also especially on preventing and reducing homelessness. It's one of the issues that the United Way of KFLNA has recognized as critically important, right? These are kids that if we maintain them in safe housing and support them with the complex needs that usually get them kicked out of housing, then they're going to be more likely to be successfully engaged in our community and be more successful as members of our community. So it's always been that commitment that the United Way has to reinvesting, right? It's not about raising money. It's about reinvesting and building the capacity that our community has to support young people and adults as well.
And I would guess that the board is anxious to figure out what the federal government and all the other agencies are going to do with the pen that generates a fair amount of money for this cause as well.
Yeah, I mean, Corrections Canada and St. Lawrence Parks Commission and the City of Kingston have all been fantastic partners with the United Way through the KP Tours and through Rock in the Big House. And there's lots of questions. It is a resource that the federal government owns and I'm sure would like to divest itself of at some point. But in the meantime, it's doing some great things for the Kingston community.
Mm-hmm. That's great. We have run out of time on the program, and I certainly appreciate you taking the time to come down and talk to us.
Well, thank you very much, David.
Theme music for the program is Stasis Oasis, a tune written and performed by Kingston musician Tim Aylesworth. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about any of our episodes, please send a note to the Kingstonian Podcast Facebook page. This is Dave Cunningham from Kingston, Ontario. Thank you for listening. Until next time.